Hello, heathens. Thank you so much for joining me today. Today, you may notice I'm wearing my tiara. I'm all in my sparkles because I am very much in my fairy tale era. I love the magic and the sparkle of the Yuletide. And one of my favourite stories when it comes to Yule is this little story over here. So let me snatch it from my Christmas tree. And this is The Nutcracker by E.T. Hoffman. This is first of all, check that out. That is such a cute edition. I absolutely love this edition. I just treated myself to it and it has illustrations. But this is the original story that I think most people are familiar with the Nutcracker ballet, but the ballet was actually based on this original story. And this is about a girl that kind of wakes up and goes into a magical land on Christmas Eve, where she encounters the Nutcracker and the Kingdom of Sweets and all these kind of, it's very much fairy tale, and the writing in the original is quite disorientating. Many people struggle with it, but I really love it. It's very, very fairy tale-esque, and it's my kind of thing. So, based on this, I went and I looked for books that were kind of based loosely around the Nutcracker, and I went on a mission to read them all and just dove into the most magical of lands and had the most incredible time, and I want to recommend some of those books. But also, if you are more on the thrills and chills side of winter reading, I also have some books here that I'd like to recommend that are kind of the antithesis of it, that are actually some wintry kind of chill like thrillers, and they're really good. So I thought, you know, yin and yang, right? If you want the fairy tale and the magic, I'll recommend you that. And if you want the thrills and chills, I'll recommend you that. But let's start with the fairy tale and the magic. So I'd be absolutely amiss to not recommend this, first of all. So this is spectacular. This is by Stephanie Garber. So I have been rereading Caraval, and I just adore the Caraval series. And Spectacular is a return to the Caraval series, and it's set at Christmas. And you have Tella and Scarlet and their significant others. I won't give it away if you haven't read Caraval, although you really need to read Caraval before reading this, because it'll give things away. I mean, you can read it, but if you're not worried about spoilers. But again, it's kind of set at Christmas, and Tella actually comes to Scarlet and says, Scarlet, I need you to move the Christmas holiday for me, for reasons. And it kind of starts off from there, and it's just utterly magical, as Caraval is. And again, it puts me in the feel of the Nutcracker. And then something that I have just read and I have absolutely fallen in love with is The Kingdom of Sweets. And this is by Erica Johansson. I believe she wrote Queen of the Tearling, which I haven't read, but I'm now kind of considering, based on the fact that I adored this book so much. So this book is, again, loosely based around the Nutcracker, but it's very much a darker, really quite nasty retelling. And you have a lot of... There's two sisters, so it very much focuses on that relationship between sisters and the rivalry and the jealousy between two sisters. So you have two sisters. They are born on Christmas Eve, and they're slightly evil, mysterious, magical godfather, Drosselmeyer, who, again, you'll know if you've read the original Nutcracker. He kind of comes in and he basically he curses them. So he goes light, dark. So Clara is all beauty and light, right? Everybody's like, she's light, she's lovely, she's beautiful, she grows up into this gorgeous 17-year-old that all the boys are chasing. Her sister, Natasha, she's dark. And she is basically cursed, of course, according to everyone, including her own family. And she kind of brings darkness, and she is unattractive, and nobody would want to marry her. And she's kind of the darkness to Clara's light. And even her own family kind of see her as worthless, because as a woman, your only worth is based around how pretty you are. Let's let that sink in. Just 1 second. Yeah. I deeply connect with Natasha. Having been the ugly sister, well, I don't have a sister, but having been the ugly child all my life, or the ugly friend is more like it. It's kind of this thing where I really heavily kind of connect with it. And as the story goes along, you see what happens when that festers. You go into the Kingdom of Sweets, and you may want to get yourself some sweets while reading these books because, the descriptions. This is delicious. It is beautiful and gorgeously written and described, but also very dark. And it really is a story of revenge and, like I said, jealousy and love and hate. And it's just magnificent. The Sugar Plum Fairy in this is quite scary. And I hugely recommend this book, certainly this time of year, but actually any time of year. It's just really, really good if you like that magic. And then the other book. So this is by M.A. Kuznets, and this is Midnight in Everwood. And this, again, is very much based on the story of the Nutcracker. This is beautiful. So as you can tell from the front, you've also got the ballet aspect in this. So this is our main character. Again, she is at a time where she's supposed to be very sweet and good and just get married. And her only value and commodity in life is being married off. Again. But that's not what she wants. She wants to be a ballet dancer. And she goes off and she kind of goes secretly to this audition, which she's not supposed to do. And again, you've got Drosselmeyer in this one. So you've actually, slightly different take, but the same sort of thing. And she also ends up in essentially the Kingdom of Sweets. So she ends up in the alternate kind of fey realm of the Nutcracker, where she encounters, the fae and a very evil king. And she's kind of trapped there. So she goes from being trapped in her own life and wanting to not be trapped in the life that she has in the human world to being trapped in this kind of Kingdom of Sweets. And again, you really want some dessert when you're reading this. Something sweet. If you have a sweet tooth, this will kill you if you do not have something sweet when you're reading this. The writing is absolutely stunning. I have another M.A. Kuznets book as well that I'm going to recommend because both of these books have absolutely stolen my heart. They're magical. They're beautiful. You are right there in that world. And she's basically stuck in this world and she's made to dance for the king. But she's not the only one that's stuck in this world. So again, this is so much more musing on your life, on expectations, on who you're meant to be, on human nature, all of that stuff. But aside from that, it's just the most beautiful, magical story. And again, if you like the Nutcracker, I highly recommend this, and I think you'll love this. Then the other M.A. Kuznets book that I cannot get enough of, and that I've kind of dressed too much because this is a 6-star read for me. This is Upon a Frosted Star. And as you can see the swan there, this book now lives in my little carriage there. But this one is also around, it's a retelling of Swan Lake, essentially the ballet. So you have elements of dance in here as well. If you love dance, if you love ballet, these books are just fabulous. But this is very much a gloriously beautiful, slightly dark adult fairy tale of a girl who is cursed by a theatre owner who, again, she wanted to run away and dance, and she was dancing in this kind of magical theatre, and then she was cursed. And only when the first snow appears on the ground is she out of her cursed form, and she's a woman. And when the snow disappears and it melts, she goes back to her cursed form. And it's about the boy who falls in love with her. And there are some magical parties. So every time the snow comes down, she throws these incredible parties. And we start off where our main male character is, they're in London. And they find these like weird invitations and they go to this manor, to this party for the first time. And just the descriptions, it very much reminds me of The Great Gatsby as well. So for me, this sort of melds the worlds of The Great Gatsby with Swan Lake. And I mean, you couldn't, like this book was written for me. But if that sounds wonderful, if you love the film as well, for Gatsby, and you love that beautiful opulent party scenes, and I really love the ending of it. And I think that's controversial because I bet you a lot of people don't, but I really liked it. Because not every fairy, I'm not going to say, because otherwise. Then let me just mention this one. So I actually haven't read this, but I'm about to read it for kind of Christmas. And this is Alexandre Dumas' The Story of the Nutcracker. So again, it's a little bit of a retelling of the original Nutcracker story. And I haven't read this yet, but I'm just going to mention this. So if you like the world of the Nutcracker, there's that. And then the last one, kind of in the fairy tale winter vein, is After the Forest by Kel Woods. I mentioned this in kind of my autumn wrap-up as well, but particularly the ending of this book is very cold, it's very icy, there's snow. It's a perfect autumn winter read. And again, this girl bakes gingerbread throughout the book, and if you do not have gingerbread while you're reading this, so this is basically a take on Hansel and Gretel, and it's this kind of premise of Gretel and Hans, her brother, they were left in the forest by their father. They encountered the witch. They managed to overpower and kill the witch, and the whole town basically thinks that Gretel is responsible for killing the witch, and that there's suspicions around her, right, that she may be a witch as well. So they've come back. They're now sort of adult-ish. I think she's like around 1920, something like that. And again, in this time, she's sort of meant to find a husband and be a good wife, but she's a little bit rebellious, which I love. This book, she also, when she came back from the witch, she brought back this book where the recipe for the gingerbread was in, and the book talks to her throughout the story, which is fabulous. So it was the witch's grimoire. This story takes so many twists and turns and takes so many elements of fairy tales. It has that Hansel and Gretel premise, but you've got shape-shifting in it. You've got this evil Countess Elizabetha, who has been taking in people to pay a blood tithe. So you've kind of got that element to it. The ending of this book is unbelievable. I will say, and I think many people will find the beginning a little bit slow, but I really love the build-up. The romance is exquisite. Like I said, you've got every kind of, almost in a way, fairy tale trope. You've got sisters again, woven into this, the apple, the evil, stepmother, all of these things, all of these classic tropes, but woven into this gorgeous, magical story that stands all on its own, that I just cannot get enough of. And Cal Edwards is coming out with a new book next year, and it's going in my pre-order because I cannot wait to read it. Now, if the fairy stuff is not for you and you want evil, I've got a list of books. First of all, I'm just going to quickly recommend this one. This is The Dead of Winter, and this is by Sarah Clegg. This is actually a collection of real life kind of customs and traditions and stories around the Yuletide, but with a really evil twist, which I love. It's kind of the darker side of Yule. And the first two stories are here. There's one on Venice Carnival. Again, the descriptions are amazing, but it's just really, really interesting. And I'm kind of reading this bit by bit, and I highly recommend that if you want to read a bit more about kind of the darker traditions of the Yuletide. But if you want fiction and you just want some good old-fashioned chills and thrills, may I recommend The Christmas Guest by Peter Swanson. This is a short little book. I mean, literally, I read it in a few hours. It's very cute. It is obviously based around Christmas. The one thing I will say about this, I've not read any Peter Swanson ever, so I don't know if all of his books are like this, but this book is kind of in two halves. So the first half of the book, the premise of this book is you have an American student. She's studying in London, and they are studying at the Connaught Institute. I think they're studying art. So they're at least, and they drink in this book, so they're at least 18, 19, right? And the beginning part of the book is you get her diary entries of this weekend that she spent at this girl's family house. So if you've watched Saltburn, again, this English girl, rich English girl, kind of befriends her and says, oh, you're American, you're by yourself in London for Christmas. Come with me to my family home. My brother's there, my family's there. Spend Christmas with us. So that's kind of the setup of this book. She goes and she spends Christmas with his family. Not always what it seems. So the first half of this book is her diary entries from that time. What I will say is it read really young. Like, I had to check a number of times on how old the character was meant to be, because honestly, that was the kind of way I was writing my diary when I was about 15, 14. It was she was just kind of liking a boy, and she was being very gushy about it, but she comes across as incredibly young, that I had to keep reminding myself that she was at least 18. So I will say that, and I don't know if that's just the writing, but bear with it, because you get to the middle, to part 2, and you're like, what? Okay, there's the best twist in the middle of this book. And then part 2 is no longer diary entries, which I preferred. So it's a short book. Give it a go. It's a lot of fun. The perfect, Christmas novella, if you want something. Then, The Gathering by C.J. Tudor. I just finished this. This is a really interesting take on a vampire thriller. So this is essentially a thriller about this town of Deerheart, where you've got humans and then you've got the vampire colony that lives on the outskirts in the woods. And a boy is dead, and the premise is that Barbara, who is the kind of the supernatural vampire FBI, she goes there to investigate what happens. This is just set, it's dark, it's cold, it's snowing, it's perfect. It's actually set at Christmas as well. So she's like, this town is really weird. They're like half of the town that looks like they've got Halloween lights up, but they've also got Christmas lights up. So it's just perfect. The thriller is interesting. It's twisty and turny. This is not glamorous at all. So I'll confess, it's not my kind of vampires. But if you like the gritty, dirtier, darker side of it just being like everyday people, no, there is zero glamour and glitz, and besides the fairy lights, the Christmas lights, there is no stardust in this book. It's a much grittier, but it's really interesting. I liked the take on a thriller by including that kind of vampire lore in it. What I will also say is that there is an epilogue right at the end of the book. So the story wraps up, but if you don't want to be annoyed, don't read the epilogue, because the epilogue makes it sound like there's a book 2, and there is no book 2 in sight that I can see. I've scoured online. So if you don't want to be annoyed, just don't read the epilogue. It has no bearing on the actual story. That's what I'm saying. But it's good. Then this one, I picked this one up randomly in a charity shop, actually. This is 30 Days of Darkness by Jenny Lund Madsen. And she's a Scandinavian author. Also, this is a really great, I don't know if you can see that, but that's like a typewriter. It's a really great cover. And what I liked about this, the premise is that you've got a writer. So she writes kind of literary novels that no one reads because people are like, well, this goes over our head. And, you know, she's very cerebral, and she really doesn't like anything that isn't very cerebral, right? So she's at this kind of convention. Her publisher's like, we've got to sell some of your books. Come to this convention. Nobody's in front of her stand. Nobody wants her books. And she sees this really famous Nordic crime writer up on stage, and he's being interviewed, and she gets really annoyed because she's just like, these novels are just trash, right? Like, they're just like for the masses. You know, it's not even difficult to write crime. And she throws something at him while he's on stage. And anyway, they kind of get into it. And essentially the setup here is that he kind of challenges her, and he's like, well, if writing crime is so easy, I challenge you and I will each write a crime novel in a month. Or is it her that challenges him? Anyway, they challenge each other to write a crime novel in a month. And then she kind of afterwards thinks, oh shit, I don't know how to write a crime novel. I can only write these really cerebral literary things. So her editor sends her off to the dead of nowhere, ice cold, I can't even remember where it is. It's like in the middle of nowhere, because she's in Copenhagen, and he sends her off. Where does he send her? Oh, Iceland. Sends her off to Iceland in the middle of nowhere to stay with this rather odd lady for a month, because he's like, look, just stay out there. There's nothing there. It'll be perfect conditions. You can write. And what happens on sort of her second day there is that someone dies, and she kind of, I guess, uses it as inspiration, and it kind of goes from there. It's really interesting. I enjoyed this. Again, it was a slightly different take. I really like Scandi noir kind of crime fiction, and I think that this is a really cool take on it. I just thought it was really interesting, and I love anything that's kind of writers related as well. So I love the kind of premise of those two writers sparring over writing the perfect crime novel. And then the final one, I adored this book. So this is The Cautious Traveller's Guide to Wastelands. It's a mouthful. By Sarah Brooks. This is also one of the most beautiful books that I own. And this is literally just the standard. It even came with its own bookmark. This is just the standard copy of this book. This wasn't even a special edition. And this book, so I don't know if you can tell there, but it says the Trans-Siberian Express. So this book, again, is perfect because it's set completely on the Trans-Siberian Express going through the icy cold wastelands. It is kind of a dystopian horror, fantasy, murder mystery, a Murder on the Orient Express with horror and dystopian and sci-fi elements is the best way I can describe it. It is the premise that the Trans-Siberian Express is going from, I think in this era it was Beijing to Moscow, for the great exhibit in Moscow. And they go through this part called the Wastelands that's really kind of scary. There's weird things that happen in it. It's dangerous to cross. And the previous trip to the one that we're on, apparently something really terrible happened. And you find out sort of the backstory of what happened. You follow some of the crew on the Trans-Siberian. You follow some of the passengers, you know, their motives for being there. You know, there's all sort of interconnected stories. Like I said, it's a little bit like a crime thriller as well. It's weird, it's creepy, it's fun, it's perfect for this time of year. So I'll tell you how I read this. I put on, like, you know, on YouTube you can get like background noise. I put on the Orient like you're on a train. So I was listening to the train noises. I could see like the frozen tundra going past the train. I had my candles lit and I was reading this, and it was perfect for the feels. It is just, I need to do more of an in-depth video just on this book, describing it. But I just found it the most interesting, fun, perfect book to read for this time of year. And like I said, very much this kind of weird horror, sci-fi take on Murder on the Orient Express. So that's it. Let me know if you've read any of them and what you think. I'll speak to you all again very soon. Happy Yuletide!